Lubnow, you are very familiar with. He's attended many of our meetings, and I'll get back to him a little later. First, I want to introduce uh, Richard DeLuca, who I consider is a visionary because he's been active in COLA. In fact, he's the co-founder of COLA 40 years ago. So we are very lucky and privileged to have him here today to give all of us a little history of COLA. And in my overview, many of the issues that he faced, that he dealt with, that he solved are still prevalent to the issues that we address today. We made progress, significant progress, but as we can imagine, our challenges change every year or two. So what was solved and addressed 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, are secondary to new issues. And I guess that's one of the advantages of NJCOLA, because we do try to stay with current, pressing, critical issues, not only with respect to water quality, lake management, but changing regulations. And changing regulations is affecting our lives in all respects. But Dr. DeLuca has an outstanding professional business background. He has received many honors and awards. He worked tirelessly with one or two other volunteers 40 years ago to put together the basis for NJCOLA. Also, as a supplement to his PhD work, he wrote an interesting article, a paper on the anatomy of a lake organization. And correct me if I'm wrong, Richard, but he used the input from at least 30 lake associations in New Jersey in formulating the original scope.
Actually, we had a membership of around 70 lakes, and I got over 400 members of those individual lakes who volunteered to answer questions for me. I sent out surveys, I held interviews between 1988 and 1992 when I got my degree.
Great.
And by the way, I had decided that I really wanted to pick a topic. By the way, I had 30 years of experience in business, and then in '82, I decided I was an officer in a company in New York. We had a change in management. I didn't like it. I had been doing a lot of adjunct teaching. My wife said, Dick, she said, I know you really love teaching. Why don't you just teach? I said, fine. But when I started looking, in fact, I was on the William Patterson's faculty for since 1974. And the chairman said, I'll give you a 5-year contract. And I realized that's not going to work. So I said, I checked around and I got an offer from Bloomfield College, which is largely minorities, by the way. And I accepted that position because they gave me 10 years. And I didn't even start for my thesis, my studies for my PhD until 1985, because I was so busy just getting my career going in teaching and also everything else involved.
If I can interrupt a minute, Richard, as you can tell, Richard is anxious to get started.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll talk about that.
It's my pleasure to present Richard. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Well, in 1980, I was a summer resident. I had a little cabin in Highland Lakes, but I had been more volunteering on different committees. And at that time, I was chairing a newly formed planning committee. So Charlie Haas from Packanack Lake got called one of his friends from Highland Lakes, said, I need somebody from your lake who could help me start a coalition. He recommended me, and I wound up meeting with Charlie. We met in March, I think it was, of 1980. I don't have the original meeting, but I do have an announcement of the second meeting. But by the way, the first meeting, we got 15 people from 12 lakes. That was, we have Highland, Packanack, High Crest, Green Pond, Glenwild. There were a whole bunch of states who were there. So we got them working on different issues to get our coalition going. And in the next meetings, we wound up putting together a set of bylaws that we got from other state coalitions. And we presented that. And then we also got volunteers to serve as officers. And the first group was myself as president, John Keyswetter from Green Pond as vice president, Dorothy Sheerenbeck from Upper Greenwood Lake as secretary, and Alicia Murphy from Highland Lakes as treasurer. And that got us going. We started holding an average of 6 meetings a year. And we covered all the topics you guys still cover. And they went really pretty well, but our membership was growing slowly. And by 1985, we had about 50 lakes from the 3 counties, because the first year, as soon as we started, John Keyswetter was from Green Pond, and that's Morris County. So, because I had sent letters to newspapers in Passaic and Bergen and Sussex counties. So he said, let's include Morris. And as a result, we wound up getting a bunch of Morris County lakes, which you still have in your membership. So anyway, those first 5 years, we just had a whole series of meetings. But in early 1986, in January, I got a call from one of the members of one of our lakes who happened to be involved in politics at the state level. He said, Dick, have you heard about with the fact that there's a new group working for the Department of Health? It's called the Public Health Council, which has been working on producing a set of bathing regulations, and they're insisting they're going to include private lakes. So I called the DOH. They told me that they were holding a meeting, I think, in the next week. And so I decided to attend the meeting. I went, and this is the headline of that meeting. I don't know if you can read it all, but it says basically, this is February 17th, lake groups blast state proposal. And then they quoted me extensively on why we felt it wasn't appropriate. I won't go into read the details, but I can put this in my report. Anyway, as a result, we got a response from the Public Health Council, and I was invited to attend some of their meetings, and 2 of the Department of Health officials who were overseeing the Health Council, I asked them to come to our meetings. And so they came to our first meeting late in 1980. And so our members started telling them the different practices we had for safety on the beaches. And they were pretty happy with that and went back. And so they said, well, we'll keep in touch with you. So during during most of this was in 85 when this happened. Now, they told us they would get in touch. Now, in March, the Department of Health sent out a tentative public recreational bathing regs for comment. Guess what? They didn't send any to us. So we weren't hearing anything from them, because in October, they set up a 65-person commission. That was the Commission on Public Health, which was going to do the work. Again, we didn't even know they existed. But in November, we heard about it. And so I got in touch, and I got 2 Department of Health representatives to come to one of our meetings, and we filled them in on what our concerns were, including our basic objection to being included, because the regulation said public bathing beaches and we were private. So we didn't think the state even had the authority. And they came to our meetings and learned a lot, and wound up being our champions, by the way, later on. So I sent the first letter to the DOH in February, where I explained, I protested our inclusion and indicated that we wanted to participate in their hearings and keep up to date. And then in July, we sent a letter and indicating that if we were included in the regulations, we were going to be applying for waivers. And they agreed with that. And sure enough, the first season, which happened to be July of '87, we were given a waiver, a blanket waiver, which, by the way, was very upsetting to some of the health department officers in different towns where they had lakes. And I remember one meeting in particular where I got into a debate with a health officer. And at that point, the DOH guys, there were two of them, were at the meeting and they were already supporting us. So when I asked him, oh, by the way, the first meeting I went to, I said, how many lake associations are in this council that you have of 65 people? None. No lake people from private lakes. And I asked him later, well, on what basis of evidence do you have that private lakes need regulation? And he, none. And that's when I asked one of the DOH guys who was there, I said, John, what do you think? Because you've heard our people, you've heard us describe what we did. And he said to the council, he said to the chair of the council, he said, frankly, from what we've seen, I think the private lakes are doing an excellent job on their own. And that was pretty good. That helped us. But we were getting into '87, which we were going to have to apply for a waiver, which we did. And in May of '87, that's when they told us they were going to include us. They didn't agree with the recommendations being made by the DOH, two DOH men, and okay, yeah, here we go. On June of '87, we attended, John Keyswetter, John Messick, and I attended the meeting, made our case. And we were told that we would have to apply for a waiver, which we did. And that was on June 7th, July. Yeah. No, June 15th. And guess what? We got it. On July 15th, the state sent out a notice advising that in the private lakes, the paid members of COLA, New Jersey COLA, were the only private lakes that would be exempt from the regulations. Guess what happened? We got a bunch of other lakes contacting us and say we want to join. So that immediately boosted our membership from like 50 to 60. That was great. So again, I'm not going to read a lot of detail here. Oh, now in '87, the council was still working on finalizing the regs, but that's the year where they're ready. They put them in effect on a temporary basis, and they asked us to prepare a set of bathing guidelines that we would use. And so I appointed a task force, a bunch of my people, primarily including guys like John Keyswetter and Greg Lally from Glenwild and a whole bunch of other people. I'm sorry if I don't remember a lot of their names, but it's been a while. Anyway, so we produced a set of bathing guidelines. Turned out to be around 10 pages. All of this I'll give to you guys. And we sent them, and we were told, that was again to the commissioner in charge of the Public Health Council. Her name was Molly Coyle. And she sent me this nice letter saying, thank you for your letter of private. Like, I've asked the staff to review these guidelines, evaluate their impact on current aquatic safety practices. And she said, we're also in the process of drafting revisions to the recreational standards. The input from your organization is timely and appreciated. We'll get in touch. And so in '87, we got the permission to the exemption, but we were told that we probably would not get it again in '88 unless we requested another waiver. So at the end of '87, we were at the stage where we were going to have to continue to press for permanent exclusion. And in the Health Council held a meeting on March of 30th, where they asked us to testify. And myself and Joan Messick and John Keyswetter went there, and each of us did. And I just want to read a couple of points that I think your members would appreciate. This is how we made our case. First of all, identifying myself, I said I represent directly some 75 private lake communities and indirectly hundreds of private lake communities throughout the state. And then I indicated which provisions of the regulations we supported, which were ones we were already doing. And then I said this, I said, it is a basic tenet of our free society that individuals and organizations should be accountable for their actions. A corollary of this basic principle is the assumption that we are capable of self-regulation and that external regulation is introduced only when individuals or groups demonstrate by their actions that they have not acted responsibly. In short, government regulation in America is the exception, not the rule. Sound Reaganese? A little bit Reaganese? Ronald Reagan's side. Anyway, and then I said the experience of private lake communities is a case in point. Under the redefinition we would be an exception because our safety record was exemplary. And at that point, they asked us to send us a record. I sent a survey out. Unfortunately, I didn't get the kind of response I wanted, but we did get 38% of our answers. And it turned out that over a 40 years period, there was one death, and it was a heart attack on the beach. And there were half a dozen injuries. And so that was presented to the council at a later meeting, although it still didn't affect their decision. So, and I also indicated, by the way, I informed that they were provided and I just said that during the testimony that the public health officers were presenting, we heard no evidence from any of them that they had any problems with any private lake. And I pointed that out. So, okay. So that pretty much took care of, and then so in 1988, though, when the season began, they sent out a letter saying that the private lakes would be included again unless they applied for individual or batch waivers. And so I made an arrangement with the Public Health Council to send us the information we needed on how we should apply. And in 88, we wound up applying separately. Like we had, I know West Milford, all those, some 13 lakes got together and they applied. And there were some lakes in Morris County got together, and we all wound up sending, and most of us I think we all got waivers again in 1988. But at that point, I had sent a letter to Governor Kane pointing out that this was not reasonable. And they were working on some other, and actually he worked on a law, which we learned at the beginning of 89 that they were exempting COLA in both 1988 and 1989 for pending further investigations. So, and that was when I was ready to complete my time at Highland Lakes. Anyway, in the 88 report, now that's when the second issue came in that we were heavily, that's when the state sent out a notice to every lake that they were going to be inspecting your dams. Now you have to remember, most of the lakes are small, even the bigger ones, and were largely earthen dams, not in great shape. And so we all knew that this was going to be a problem. So we started working with the state and with the DEP to try to get some forms of relief so that if we did have to do some work, we could at least get some support, especially like from banks to get low interest loans and things like that. And so that wound up taking a good part of our time in 88 and 89. Finally, Public Health Council meeting January 1979. This is the minutes of the meeting of January 9th. They had a motion where their interpretation was still that a group of regulated industries had objected to various aspects, and they included a letter from my letter to the Department of Health providing information. And that's when they mentioned that the survey we sent them wasn't as extensive as they would like, because it was only 40% of our members, but they still said they reported safe practice. And the minutes of the meeting said what COLA opposes to is being mandatorily regulated by a state agency because they consider themselves in the private sector. And that's one of the items. Well, anyway, so we kept in touch. And finally, in 1989, we were doing land use, our members doing land use surveys and identification of wetlands and helping them put together their case for whatever had to be done for their dams. And finally, in April of '89, I sent a letter saying I was sorry to report we've been unsuccessful in gaining relief from the public guidelines, and that we would have to do individual waivers, which was fine. And finally, in the '89 report to the members, I summarized the meetings we had, and that I mentioned that the new slate of officers would be Francis Smith from Lake Mohawk as president, John Keeswetter, excuse me, from Green Pond as our vice president, Dorothy Sheerenbeck as our secretary, and secretary treasurer. And then we had 5 trustees. We had myself, Bernie Bukowski from Forest Lake, Steve Sanchez from Pines Lake, Tim Bowman from Highcrest Lake, and Joan Messick from Culver Lake. And I mentioned that we had been busy with the dam regulations in that year, and that governor, and here was the important thing, I said, we obtained some relief through the act signed by Governor Kane last June. That would be June of '88. Here, granting a partial exemption to private lakes for 1989 and 1990 bathing seasons. So we got partial relief for the 2 years. And that's the point at which I was finishing up my time at COLA. And finally, in my final report to the members, oops, hope I can find it. By the way, we did develop our own bathing guidelines, and they were pretty much approved by the state. But in my final report, I thanked all the members for their support. I reminded them that I was currently working on a dissertation about lake communities, and I was asking for their support in responding to surveys I was sending, and they did so. And to be honest about it, if it weren't for all these members who gladly responded and filled out these extensive questionnaires, spent hours with me in interviews, I wouldn't have been able to finish that thesis. And so I'm very thankful to all of the members of the lake, and I thoroughly enjoyed my tenure there. And I was very happy to turn this over to Fran Smith, who just wound up doing a bang-up job as my successor. So if anybody has any questions, I'll try to answer some, but that's the story.
Are there any questions? If not, I certainly want to thank Dr. DeLuca for being with us today, giving us an overview of the first 10 years of NJCOLA. And it's obvious from what Richard has said is through working together, collaboration, they addressed a number of key issues. And as we know today, there are new issues. I believe around 1990, when Fran Smith took over as the second president of NJCOLA, Eileen Bourne from Dolan and Dolan volunteered to work with NJCOLA. And we thank Eileen for all of the legal guidance, accomplishments, and ongoing efforts that we face here today. And one of the things that NJCOLA will need to look at in the future is to continue the collaboration, to continue the outreach. And there are many new issues that are best dealt with through an organized approach led by NJCOLA. So I urge all of our members, and we do have 70 to 80 dues paying members at the present time. We do need to work closer together to collaborate, as I said before, and work with our politicians in addressing some of the key issues that we face. And as you know, our members are not only interested and need to know the technology side of lake quality management, but also the management side, starting with bylaws and so forth, and other issues which constantly are brought up. And we hope to expand into those areas to a greater extent through our website. So I thank you, Richard. We welcome you here today. And Richard has volunteered to turn over some of his earlier papers and reports, and I'll be picking that up probably in July. So thank you, Richard.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.